Afro-Atlantic Histories celebrates the legacy and impact of the African diaspora, examines the visual cultures and artistic innovations of Afro-Atlantic territories, and explores cultural exchanges and historical relations among Africa, the Americas, the Caribbean, and Europe through artwork by Black and non-Black artists from the 17th to the 21st century. The word histories in the title indicates the plurality of the narratives represented in the exhibition. They are fictional and non-fictional, mythical and factual. This show resists the idea of a definitive history or grand narrative of the diaspora and presents diverse accounts of the past that challenge long-established hierarchies and forge new questions and connections that show how complex and intertwined are all of our histories. Because the exhibition is arranged thematically, not chronologically or geographically, a transnational and transhistorical dialogue effectively occurs among the works, reflecting the parallels and frictions among the many histories of Afro-descendant peoples. By juxtaposing historical art with more contemporary points of view, we see, for instance, the ways in which earlier European imagery has been appropriated, recontextualized, or contradicted by Black artists in later works to represent the lingering effects of fraught histories, but also demonstrate the creative ways artists have radically reimagined those pasts with an eye toward the future. Afro-Atlantic Histories was originally presented in Sao Paulo's Museum of Art in 2018 with over 400 works at 2 venues. It has now been refined for a U.S. tour, and for the National Gallery presentation, it gathers over 130 artworks and documents into 6 sections that show a range of artworks in diverse styles and media. Depicting ships and continents, the works of art in the Maps and Margins section powerfully evoke the early crossings and encounters of the Black diaspora, from the arrival of Portuguese slave traders in Africa in 1526 to the abolition of slavery in Brazil in 1888, more than 10 million Africans were violently removed from their homes and their families. These enslaved people were forced across the Atlantic Ocean and exploited for their labor to build cities, till fields, mine natural resources, and maintain households. With them, they brought their cultures, which have inspired generations ever since. This section of the exhibition focuses on the passage between Africa and the Americas and how artists have represented and reinterpreted the history shaped within. These displacements of people and goods across the Atlantic basin are often described in terms of the triangle trade, representing 3 navigation routes. On the first leg, Europeans traveled by sea to Africa, seeking to exchange manufactured goods and agricultural products for imprisoned Africans. On the second leg, the Middle Passage, these individuals were transported and enslaved to be sold largely in the Americas and the Caribbean. Last, on the third leg, commodities were taken from the colonies to be traded in Europe. Artist Hank Willis Thomas creates a new map for A Place to Call Home, Africa-America Reflection, a large-scale mirrored stainless steel wall sculpture that draws a fictional map of an African-American continent. In this imagined Americas, the area that corresponds to South America is replaced by the African continent. Thomas's sculpture demonstrates how maps are representations, not realities. A map reflects the perspectives of its creator, who shapes the world they want to see to tell the story they want to tell. Moreover, the design of the sculpture refers to the senses of both connection and detachment that many African Americans feel in relation to Africa and the U.S. Thomas has said this work is, quote, related to ideas about being a hyphenated American, an African American in a visible sense. There's this mythical connection to Africa that is embedded in your identity, but many people go to Africa looking for home and don't find it because our roots are so diluted there. They also never felt at home in the U.S., where they were born. I wanted to make a place where African Americans come from, end quote. The mirrored surface of A Place to Call Home conveys this idea of creating a place in which one belongs by visually placing viewers within the work and allowing them to effectively occupy that imagined space. At the same time, the work reflects all viewers, encouraging empathy of non-Black viewers for the cultural experiences of people different from themselves. Fittingly, a place to call home will be at the entrance, and the first work one sees as they enter the exhibition, so they immediately and literally see themselves in relation to histories shaped by the African diaspora. The violence of slavery cannot be understood without considering the struggle for freedom. From revolts against kidnappings in Africa to rebellions aboard slave ships, later uprisings on plantations, escape to hidden settlements, and even suicides, resistance has always been a part of the histories of enslavement. These emancipations were not always dependent upon the aid of non-Black people from official acts, letters of manumission, or gestures of charity, but also were achieved through the powerful actions of enslaved men and women and free Black populations. The terror of enslavement and struggles for emancipation are encountered in this section. European artists frequently illustrated the conditions of captivity, providing glimpses of the past. Their art, combined with documents recording the sales of enslaved people and advertisements for their recapture after escape, indicates the everyday cruelty and absolute loss of freedom. Contemporary artists have confronted this brutality by incorporating historic images of slavery in their own work, evoking the horrors of the past and the trauma from these histories that persists today. Based on a real event in which over 2,000 people at a slave auction intentionally placed low bids, Thomas Satterwhite Noble's painting, The Last Sale of Slaves in St. Louis, Missouri, is an unfinished painting of grand scale. It features a group of Black men, women, and children presented for sale on the steps of the St. Louis courthouse, ironically the citadel of justice. Also ironic is the fact that Noble grew up on a Kentucky plantation in a prosperous slave-owning family, and in the Civil War, he fought for the Confederacy. Following the war, Noble moved to New York and took on African Americans as the primary subject of his painting, perhaps as a reflection of an underlying sense of guilt or as a response to the burgeoning market for this type of subject matter. In The Last Sale of Slaves, Noble centers a Black enslaved woman holding an infant in her arms. Despite the cruelty of the activity surrounding the woman, Noble romanticized the figure, who caresses her child with downcast eyes, creating a somber, touching moment. Directly in front of the platform is a stylishly dressed family that actually is a portrait of the artist, his wife, and his son. The artist situates himself as an eyewitness to history, who introduces his child to the practice of slavery, as young people like him are being sold. Specifically, we see a little girl across from the boy who looks directly at the viewer, eliciting compassion, but also implicating the viewer as yet another onlooker of these horrors. In response to histories like those depicted in Noble's painting, Nona Faustine researched the practice of slavery in her native New York City to create portraits of herself embodying the experience of Black women of those past in her photographic series titled White Shoes, which includes From Her Body Sprang Their Greatest Wealth. In this image, Faustine poses at an intersection on Wall Street, where New York City's first slave market operated from 1711 to 1762. Faustine is completely nude, save for a pair of white high-heeled shoes and metal cuffs that bind her wrists. Standing on a plain wooden box in the middle of the intersection, she solemnly faces the viewer. The reenactment of a scene of an enslaved woman presented at an auction recalls the fact that the bodies of Black women were forms of currency or commodities traded like stocks on Wall Street. As sources of capital, they labored and produced laborers to benefit their enslavers, creating wealth to be passed down to future generations living today. Faustine's presence creates a temporal shift, back and forth between the 18th and the 21st centuries. Her manacled body, posed on a wooden platform, situates us in the 1700s, while the cityscape and her modern white high-heeled shoes reminds us of the present day. Brave and unashamed, Faustine portrays the struggle, but also the survival, even the thriving, as suggested by her gleaming white heels, of Black women who were able to create culture and community of which she is living proof. With the end of slavery in the United States in 1865, Brazil, Cuba, and Puerto Rico became the only regions in the Americas and Caribbean where it remained legal. The pressure to abolish the institution came from all sides: journalists, politicians, activists, and especially enslaved Black people themselves. Puerto Rico and Cuba, which were both Spanish colonies until 1898, did not abolish slavery until 1873 and 1886, respectively. Brazil abolished the system 2 years later. This marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one, in which the struggle of Black populations for true social, economic, and political inclusion continues to the present day.
Africans who arrived in the Americas and the Caribbean created their own spaces in response to new experiences of displacement. This section, called Everyday Lives, features images of daily life in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas from the 17th century to the present, reflecting moments of both labor and leisure in Black communities. Installed according to theme, paintings from different periods and regions propose dialogues among pictures of Black people in the context of farms, markets, street scenes, and interiors. Works made by Europeans often romanticized Black subservience and uncritically portrayed forced labor as a natural part of everyday life. During the period of the Dutch colonization of a portion of northeastern Brazil, Frans Post painted the first representations of the so-called New World. After his return to the Netherlands, he continued painting Brazilian themes, but with fantastical elements, as seen in Landscape with Anteater, in which an anteater and an armadillo appear larger than life. Even more fanciful than the oversized creatures is the painting's depiction of Black people living in relative harmony with indigenous people and European colonists, giving the false impression that the violence and conflicts of slavery and colonialism did not exist there. Later imagery by Afro-descendant artists presents the daily activities of Black homes and neighborhoods in more humanistic ways. It also details realities of racial inequities and state violence. After the end of slavery in Brazil in 1888, formerly enslaved people moved to Rio de Janeiro in search of work. Unable to find jobs, they lived in haphazard conditions on hills, forming communities known as favelas. Heitor dos Prazeres portrayed the place he called Little Africa. He painted the daily life of families, samba groups, folk festivals, and bohemian life on the streets of Lapa and downtown Rio. In this work, Prazeres depicts an area outside of the city where Black and white workers return from the fields with the day's harvests. The appearance of the group, with bodies almost merging, suggests a sense of community and intimacy. Their humble hillside dwellings can be seen in the background. Spiritual and musical cultures passed down and adapted through generations have been central to the cultures of the Black Atlantic. Images of festivals, ceremonies, and other rituals have circulated within the African diaspora since the 16th century. This section includes depictions of various types of music and dance: merengue in the Dominican Republic, candombe in Uruguay, samba in Brazil, and jazz in the United States. Carnival spread throughout the coasts of the Black Atlantic and took multiple forms, becoming a recurrent motif for several artists, as in the examples from Brazil, Jamaica, and Haiti included here. Popular festivals were connected to religious rituals and pervaded by orishas, or spirits, and Black saints. They assumed many forms: candomblé, macumba, and umbanda in Brazil, voodoo in Haiti, revivalism in Jamaica, and Santeria in Cuba. Ceremonies, foods, ornaments, and instruments, and different types of priests and priestesses were reinvented in the Americas and the Caribbean. However, they share the use of African languages and references in their songs, divinities, and views of the cosmos, world, and nature. Born in 1887, Clementine Hunter worked mainly as a field hand and house servant at the Melrose Plantation in northwestern Louisiana. She began making art in her late 50s, ultimately producing more than 5,000 works. Hunter said that she simply painted what came to mind, usually scenes from life in rural Louisiana, such as crop gatherings, baptisms, funerals, revival meetings, fish fries, and still lifes. For materials, she used what she had at hand, including discarded window shades, cardboard boxes, and brown wrapping paper. Religious faith permeated Hunter's life and found its way into her art, as she frequently painted people attending church services, funerals, and baptisms. Her Black Jesus conveys Christ's crucifixion with an economy of detail. By giving Jesus a dark brown skin tone, Hunter claims the Savior as one of her own people and invites comparisons between the suffering of Christ and that of enslaved Africans, as well as modern-day Black Americans.
This section presents an array of portraits from the 17th century through the present of Black men, women, and children. Some of these are the most celebrated Afro-Atlantic portraits in the history of art. In these pictures, we see leaders, heroes, and ordinary individuals, nudes and fashion plates, invented subjects, and the artists themselves in a range of media made by artists from Africa, the Americas, Europe, and the Caribbean. Traditional portrait galleries display images of government heads, religious leaders, and the members of the elite, almost always white people, usually white men. Historic portraits of Black people are rare, and portraits of Black people depicted as individuals, as opposed to types, perversely helps to establish and reiterate race, gender, and class discrimination. The 1640s portrait of Don Miguel de Castro, the emissary of Congo to the Dutch Republic, is one of those rare images depicting a Black person as an influential, powerful individual. The painting is remarkable for the proud stance of the sitter and the elaborate portrayal of European clothing of the time, including the broad white collar, the Black jewel-encrusted hat with the long reddish crest, and the silvery sash. These indicate de Castro's power and wealth. South African artist Zanele Mohole's 2016 work, Nikozake 2, Parktown, is from the artist series Sanyanyama Ngonyama, which in Zulu means Hail the Dark Lioness. In each work, Mohole appears in the guise of a different persona through the use of props, pose, costume, and expression. Here, as a kind of Statue of Liberty, the artist has also exaggerated the darkness of their skin in post-production, heightening their assertion of their own Blackness. Mohole's portrait places a powerful Black woman in the position that we would have seen white figures in classic portraiture. The work embraces the power of its sitter, refusing to give it to us. Taken as a whole, the portraits included in Afro-Atlantic Histories affirm poise, power, and the presence of Black people throughout the Black Atlantic. This section takes its cues from Histories of Resistance and Activism, the powerful pursuit of self-determination. When Haitians declared independence in 1804, they proclaimed freedom in the first-person plural as a mission and a destiny. We have dared to be free, let us be thus by ourselves and for ourselves. From a sugar colony under French rule to the first New World country to abolish slavery, Haiti became an early symbol of Black power that threatened to destabilize the entire colonial system. Enslaved men and women could overthrow their masters and seize their freedom. From the moment of their arrival in the Americas, Africans and their descendants sabotaged the enslaving regime. Freed, escaped, and enslaved Black populations not only reacted against enslavement and racism, they also created their own religions, family ties, institutions, and social practices that continue to inspire activists and artists today. Works in this section reflect visual protest strategies in demonstrations, banners, textiles, and performances that have circulated throughout the Black Atlantic and played a central role in activism. Brazilian artist José Antonio Cunha made his 1995 textile Black resistance organizations Ili Ai for members of Ili Ai, the oldest Afro-Brazilian carnival block or street band. Founded in 1974, Ili Ai is known for its promotion of Black pride, culture, and political consciousness. Cunha's banner refers to several historical and contemporary Black resistance organizations, including carnival blocks, political parties, carnival groups linked to the Candomblé religion, and quilombos, escaped slave communities. In the center, Cunha transformed the Brazilian flag, altering the colors and motto to represent Ili Ai and offer a rereading of the national symbol. The reworked symbols, which incorporate Afro-Atlantic deities and religions, are signs of resistance to the oppression Black Brazilians experience. Along similar lines, Harlem-born artist and author Faith Ringgold is known for merging the African-American tradition of quilting with the language of contemporary art. In Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima, the first of Ringgold's famous story quilts, the artist pieced together fabric painted with human figures and handwritten texts to create a new history of Aunt Jemima, now named Jemima Blackie. No longer an icon of Black servitude, Jemima Blackie has a history, complete with a family, dreams, and success. The quilt subverts stereotypes of Black women used to support policies supporting discrimination and Black disenfranchisement. Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima attests to Ringgold's commitment to a politics aimed at overcoming oppression, placing Black women at the center of the struggle. Expressing cultural, political, religious, and artistic identities, the works in this section assert and advance the ongoing struggle for full and dignified freedom throughout the Black Atlantic. Afro-Atlantic Histories reveals the staggering quality and power of the art made by Africans and their diasporic brethren in the Caribbean and the Americas, as well as the response by European artists to the stimulating presence of multifarious African cultures in their midst. We invite you to come to the National Gallery and engage firsthand with these extraordinary works of power that give insight into the cultures, activisms, and lived experiences of the Black Atlantic.